We are recording and I will start our wonderful event. So welcome everyone. I'm so happy that we have so many students and our panelists here on our call today. My name is Megan D'Amico and I'm the Vice President of Spartans for Science and Policy at the University of North Carolina at Greensboro. And we are really happy to co-host this event with UNC's Science Policy and Advocacy Group, as well as NC State's SciPol PAC. Altogether, we make the North Carolina Students for Science Policy Coalition, and this is a seminar included in our Certificate Science Policy Training Series. So we're really happy to have our four panelists here today as we explore science policy and advocacy careers. Just so that we have a little bit of housekeeping information on file, please keep your camera and microphone muted, camera off and microphone muted during our talk. You are being recorded, so please keep that in mind. If you have questions for our wonderful panelists, please feel free to put them in the chat. And if any question is directed at one or the other, please make sure to put their name before the question so that they can answer that for you. We will be putting a link in the chat after this seminar or during the seminar today. So if you are writing a response, summary response for our certificate series, you'll have that available to you. And last but not least, if you're having any issues with Zoom or some technical problems, feel free to message Connor Harris. He is our tech person on the call today. So message him and he can get you all straightened out. And without further ado, I would like to introduce our speakers today. On our panel, we have Melissa Varga. Melissa is a Science Network Community and Partners Manager at the Union of Concerned Scientists. She manages the online community for the Science Network, a group of nearly 24,000 scientists and technical experts interested in applying their science to advocacy. She is also the lead organizer of Science Rising, a nonpartisan network of partners and advocates fighting for science, equity, and justice leading up to the 2020 election. Welcome, Melissa. We are so excited to have you. Next up, we have Dr. Jennifer Salerno. She's an assistant professor at George Mason University in the Department of Environmental Science and Policy, where her research group is interested in the role of microbes, or in the role that microbes play in organism health and ecosystem function. She earned her PhD in zoology from the University of Hawaii and her master's in biology from the College of William and Mary. She also engages in the science communication and interdisciplinary work at the intersections of policy, science, and diplomacy. She previously worked on coastal and ocean issues in the U.S. House of Representatives as a NOAA Sea Grant House Fellow and served as a AAAS Science and Technology Policy Fellow at the U.S. Department of State, Bureau of East Asian and Pacific Affairs in the Office of Economic Policy. In this capacity, she advised and coordinated U.S. policy on science and technology, energy, and ocean issues across the United States federal agencies and in the East or Asia Pacific Economic Cooperation. Welcome, Dr. Salerno. Next up, we have Chloe McPherson. She is a 2021 Congressional Science and Engineering Fellow sponsored by the American Society of Mechanical Engineers. From 2017 to 2020, Chloe worked as an Associate Government Relations Officer at AAAS, where she served as the editor of AAAS's science policy newsletter, The Policy Alert. And she also played an integral role in AAAS's programs, including catalyzing science and catalyzing advocacy in science and engineering, the CASE workshop, as well as the Golden Goose Award. She received her BS and her master's in mechanical engineering from both Iowa State University. Welcome, Chloe. We're so happy to have you here. And last but not least, we would love to welcome Dr. Natasha Ugu-gama. She serves as the program manager for the international and community engagement at the American Geophysical Union, where she is responsible for building community partnerships. She also leads the AGU Thriving Earth Exchange's international program development, serving as a community liaison to domestic science projects. Natasha has extensive experience in community engagement, partnership, and development at the local, national, and international scale. She earned her PhD in Environment and Geography from Macquarie University in Sydney, Australia, where she specialized in multi-sector partnerships for effective and sustainable community-owned early warning systems. We are so happy to have all four of our panelists here. And with that, I will lead it over to Chloe to get us started off. We'll hear from all four panelists, and then we'll open it up to questions. Go ahead, Chloe.
Okay, let's see if I can figure out how to share my screen. Share screen, open the right one. Bear with me. Okay. One second. Sorry, I'm usually better at this. Share screen. Oh, it's because I have so many windows open, it didn't pop up at first. That's why. Okay. Okay, there we go. So now that I took forever and a day just to do that, I will hopefully not bore you with a quick overview of just my career in science policy. So thank you, Megan, for that. So yeah, okay, just starting a little bit about me. So as Megan mentioned, I did my education at Iowa State University. So I'm a mechanical engineer by training. I stopped at the master's, so I don't have a PhD, but hopefully I can be proof that you don't need to have a PhD to have an involvement in science policy. So just briefly about me. Up until recently, I worked at AAAS in its Office of Government Relations. Previously to that, I held internships on science policy in both the nonprofit and government sector, and did an internship in the private sector, and I am currently a congressional fellow. So I'll just kind of go into those real quick and move forward. So just, yeah, so how did I get involved in science policy? I feel like, as many people did, I kind of fell into it. I didn't think that I was going to go into science policy. It kind of just happened. So my very first internship as an engineer was with an engineering firm, just private sector, nothing too fancy, but I realized I didn't really want to do that. And I imagine that's something that many of you are experiencing while you're doing your PhD programs. You know, I don't know if I want to do this particularly. So I explored a little further. Did an internship at the Ames National Laboratory, which is in the backyard of Iowa State where I went to school, which was really convenient, and did research there on wind farms. And then after that, did an internship my first time in DC with the Department of Energy in an office called EPSA, which no longer exists, in the summer of 2014, the Office of Energy Policy and Systems Analysis. And so during that internship, I spent a lot of time working on something called the Quadrennial Energy Review, also known as like the QER. So what that was is supposed to be, so this 2014, President Obama had handed down a mandate to the DOE to put out a report on, you know, the energy sector in the US and changes that could be made. So I spent my summer doing just some research on oil and gas for that. So then I was in grad school right after that, did my master's in mechanical engineering and human-computer interaction. So my thesis focused on using augmented reality at one phase of the engineering product design process, which was interesting to me, but also something I didn't want to do. So I was like, you know, what can I do after this? By some miracle, I got an internship with the White House right after I graduated with my master's. So I worked with the Domestic Policy Council in its Office of Energy and Climate Change, and that was in the fall of 2016. So it was a very hectic time, as you can imagine, working in DC in the White House during an election year. So that was definitely a time to remember. And then my last internship that I had was actually at AAAS, which is what led to my full-time job there, which was very helpful, very, very grateful for, which is very good. So going on to AAAS. So having an internship in science policy was really my avenue, my key, my way of getting into it. You know, I didn't know for sure how I fit into the world of science policy. And so the internships that I had and the first science policy specific one that I had at AAAS really gave me a flavor of, you know, what is this space and, you know, how can I be involved in it? And having a first look at policy at the DOE and then more in depth at the White House, you know, gave me a tiny glimpse into what policy looked like in the government. And so AAAS, you know, obviously you all have heard of it, is like one of the many key players that are in the science policy sphere from the nonprofit side. And so I spent 6 months as an intern in the spring of 2017, and it was fortunate enough to be hired on and stayed there till about 2 months ago, so for about 3.5 years, which was great. So the things that I worked on there, as were mentioned in my bio, AAAS has a newsletter called the Policy Alert that is sent to probably about 100,000 of its members every week and covers different science and technology policy topics. So I served as the editor for that and covered congressional hearings, mainly the House Science Committee and things like that. And that gave me like a glimpse into the world of Capitol Hill. As well, I helped run a workshop we did every year called the CASE workshop, so Catalyzing Advocacy in Science and Engineering. In the pre-COVID times, it would happen every spring, and we would have 200 graduate students from all around the country come to DC for 3.5 days, and we would teach them about science policy, advocacy, science communication, and the importance of getting your message across. And then on that last day of the workshop, they would go up to Capitol Hill and have a Hill Day, so they would meet with representatives or with staff to discuss different science policy topics. And then the Golden Goose Award, which is a particularly fun one. So the award itself is a play on an award that was given out in the 1970s, known as the Golden Fleece Award, which was a member of Congress who wanted to highlight, government spending that they thought was superfluous. And so the Golden Goose Award honors federally funded research that's gone on to have really big impacts in the world. One of my favorite examples is one of the ones that I got to work on last year for Golden Goose, which was the blood of the horseshoe crab, which is research from the 50s and 60s that led to something known as the LAL test, where most medications and implant devices are tested through this. So that's a fun one I recommend looking up. And there's a quick day-to-day for that. We would have those different seasons of the year where you focus on one big project, but for my role, I covered a lot of social media, website things, as well as other communication. So that's a skill I feel I would highly recommend developing now in grad school to get ready for, the real world when you enter the science policy sphere. So I am currently, as of last month, a congressional fellow sponsored by the American Society of Mechanical Engineers. It has been a whirlwind so far. I was placed in the office of Representative Chrissy Houlihan, a Democrat from Pennsylvania. She represents the 6th District in Pennsylvania. And I am covering a swath of issues, including energy, environment, science, technology, STEM education, and space, including there's a picture on the screen covering the Women in STEM caucus for the representative who's a co-chair of it. So I am by no means an expert in all of those things, but staff on the Hill and offices are so small, everyone becomes an expert or a quasi-expert in so many different things. And just briefly, I'll say, I was, really drawn to this program, having worked at AAAS, having a taste of, the executive branch a little bit from internships from the nonprofit side from AAAS, and then wanting to see what is this legislative body that's making all of the laws, what is that really like? So it's only been a few weeks, but so far so good. Another thing I will say is knowing your why and why you want to do things. So one of the pictures on the slide on the far left, I don't think you can read it, but it's a piece of paper that I had in my office at AAAS every day and would look at it. And it's a list of every member of the US Senate who is a person of color who's ever served as a senator. And in the entire 250-year history of the Senate and of our country, every non-white person who served as a senator fits on one piece of paper. So that was kind of my inspiration for being engaged in this and being involved and wanting to work on the Hill, just knowing that there are more voices of people of color and women who need to be at the table. So wanting to get a better sense of that. So I won't bore you with this, and I'll share my slides with Megan, who can share them with you. But I recently gave another talk on getting involved with AAAS, so I just wanted to lay out a few programs on this slide, science policy programs you can get involved with, as well as a few programs that are based locally or that have a local focus where they're focusing on different states, and that you might be able to have the opportunity to get engaged with. So there's that. As well, here's just a Science Policy 101 slide that I'll recommend looking at more in detail later, just with a few Twitter follow recommendations things to focus on now, things that you guys are already involved with, you know, your science policy group and webinars and things like that. And to end, I'll just say thank you. Feel free to contact me either on Twitter, and here's my work email. So I will turn it back over to Megan.
Thank you so much, Chloe. That was awesome. I guess I have one question for you now, and then I'll pass it over to Jennifer. So now that you're kind of in this space of you're like a quasi-expert on all of these different topics, how do you best manage your time to kind of study all of those topics? Because we as graduate students or undergrads are hyper-focused in a major or a very strict discipline. So how do you kind of manage that?
I will say I'm still figuring all that out. The Hill has a great resource known as CRS, the Congressional Research Service, and they have experts on every topic under the sun there. So it's been really useful getting to know them because they are the true experts. I don't claim to be an expert really on anything. It's funny, I was just talking with one of their experts on environmental justice earlier today, because it's obviously something that's a very big topic, but not something I know. It's a big balance, I think, between getting knowledge from the Hill and people who have it on the Hill, and meeting with student groups and other outside groups who have that information, who are experts on topics, who can let Hill staff, particularly since most Hill staff don't have a science background, know the data and the information behind things to help make decisions.
Yeah, that's really true. Sometimes I just forget CRS exists, and then I'm like, oh wait, we have this incredible service.
It is amazing. If you ever have the chance to look at the reports, I highly recommend it.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you so much, Chloe. Next up, we have Dr. Jennifer Salerno. You can go ahead and take the floor.
Okay, fantastic. Thank you. I admit I will not be as polished as Chloe, but I did throw some slides together to present to you about my pathway to science policy and back and the back again. So I'll explain what that means. As Megan mentioned, I'm currently back in academia, but in an interdisciplinary department at George Mason University, which is environmental science and policy. I have to say, I in some ways didn't anticipate I would be back in academia, but I have to say now that I am, I think it was a confluence of sort of the perfect storm. No, the perfect situation, in that I don't think I would have been inclined to go back to a straight, maybe a biology or an oceanography department. So my background is in ocean science. So I'll talk a little bit about my path. But just to start, so I did my bachelor's degree in biology and marine science at Rutgers University in New Jersey. And I had set out really with the true intention of becoming a marine scientist. And I was told, okay, well, to do that, you need to get a PhD. Okay. And then I went on, I kind of took a segue to do a master's degree. I did want to go straight to my PhD, knowing that that was sort of the end goal at that point. But there was this wonderful opportunity. Someone said, hey, would you like to go? Someone's looking for graduate students. And by the way, you get to dive in the Alvin submarine. And I was like, okay, sign me up. So that was really interesting. And at that time, exploratory research was not very rooted in any type of conservation or policy. So I'll go back, revisit that. But then after that time, I did realize that I wanted to study more holistically, I suppose, and be in this places that I was, that were my sort of research sites, and in an area where I guess over time I realized that in terms of conservation, it's really managing people, right? So I'll get actually into the story of how I came to this place, because between my master's degree and my PhD, I went and volunteered in Costa Rica at the sea turtle conservation program. And it was one of the oldest in the world. And while I was there, it was very clear to me that science alone was not going to solve the conservation problem. And so, in fact, this program had been doing quite well. It was, I mentioned, the oldest and most successful, but there were still very, very many issues that were still occurring. So there was still poaching going on. And in fact, we knew who the person was that was poaching the nests simply by the size of their feet, which were very large. And it was a teenage man. But at the time, we were foreigners coming into a community And this community was supporting their family, right? You can sell sea turtle eggs there for profit. It's considered an aphrodisiac and also a food item. In addition to that, we would go to the school to try to speak to the students about the importance of sea turtle conservation. And sometimes the schools would just be closed and the students were wandering around outside. And so that was even difficult to try to sort of reinforce that education component. Another thing was, this was a small sort of barrier island where this site was located, and the funding for trash removal had been essentially had stopped. And so these folks, this community didn't really use the beach very often, so they would bury their trash in this turtle nesting beaches. And so that was another issue, right? So I started all these sort of different angles or multifaceted issues started to arise where clearly you couldn't just come in with the science and save the day, right? It was much more nuanced and complex than originally thought. And so I knew that going on in graduate school, if I was going to spend quite some time on a topic, that I wanted to study in a place where the work that I was doing could help communities in some way and also involve those communities in the decision-making processes. So I ended up going to the University of Hawaii and working mostly in the Northwestern Hawaiian Islands. And during that experience, we were they were at the time putting that area up for designation as a marine protected, or as a marine sanctuary, national marine sanctuary. And then President Bush at the time came in and designated it as a marine national monument. So the Papahanaumokuakea Marine National Monument. But during that process, it was really interesting because I worked along with NOAA. We were trying to develop health indices for corals that could be used by resource managers, and also working with the native Hawaiian community, because this was a very sacred place for them. And so from that, again, I started to learn that conservation is as much about people as it is about places and animals and things like that. And I really became interested in how science is, or if it was at all, actually used by decision makers in their decision making. And so I was encouraged to apply for the NOAA Canals Marine Policy Fellowship. So that was my first foray into the policy world. And so I bounced back and forth between academia. So I'll go back to revisit some of the things that I did. But first, I just kind of want to show you this, because this was sort of, as I mentioned, when I was an undergraduate, I was told your path is from A to B. Many of you in academia, if you want to go into academia, you have to stay in academia. You can't, it's like a cult. Once you leave, you can't come back. Or if you want to land a position, you need to do your PhD. And so I thought, okay, I'll do my undergraduate degree, land a cool internship, and go on to pursuing higher education and get my dream job, right? Whatever that was at the time. But expectation versus reality, this is in fact more of what my timeline looked like. And I was a person that was pretty set out and focused on what I thought that I wanted to do. But life, happens in the process, and there are twists and turns. And so, personal and professional. And I have to say that if I had to do this all over again, I absolutely would. And that I think for some of us, and like Chloe mentioned, some of these opportunities that we pursued were kind of a leap into the unknown. And I just certainly highly recommend that. It brought about so many new experiences and skill sets, and it really widened my perspective and my idea, and now my approach to how I do science since I've gone back into academia. So just to go back, I worked on Capitol Hill as well, in a congressional office on the House side, where I worked a lot on marine issues. But what was notable at the time is my boss, the House had flipped, and she was kicked off the Natural Resources Committee. So then she needed much more help on energy and commerce, and that was something that I had not really worked on at all, really, before I moved, from Hawaii in February to Washington, D.C., but definitely not before my career. And so that really came into play later when I returned to policy, because they were also looking for someone that had some experience with energy policy. So you just never know where your next opportunity is going to come from and what might have prepared you to get to that point. But as I mentioned, life happens. So I did get married at some point in this timeline, and we decided we should probably live together at some point. And so I moved to North Carolina, and actually I took a year and a half away from academia and professional life in general. So I like to put that in there because I think there were certainly times during that time period where I wasn't sure if I could return to the workforce, let alone academia, right? But I did. So after that period, my spouse and I decided that we were going to come back to the DC area, that we would both likely find positions within our skill set and our interest there. I applied to many policy positions and one academic position, and guess which is the one that ended up working out. So I came back to academia, and I thought, okay, I'm going to spend like a year here and take it from here. And someone was looking for my exact skill set at George Mason. And so I, again, landed in this department of environmental science and policy. And I thought, wow, this is pretty interesting. It's a very interdisciplinary department. It was exactly the type of program that I was looking for when I was a graduate student, but I didn't know existed. And now I think there are more like it. My postdoc advisor ended up leaving, and they hired me on as a visiting professor. But within that time, I did, because of the uncertainty of the visiting professor position, I decided to pursue a AAAS Science and Technology Fellowship at the Department of State, because again, my husband was at State and we were trying to do the career alignment. So my interesting story about that is I thought, okay, there's only one office I really want to be in there. It's the Ocean and Environmental and International Sciences. It's OES. I only know acronyms anymore. But I thought at the time, if it was that office or bust, there probably wasn't many other opportunities that would fall within my sort of career goals. But lo and behold, an office was advertising for someone to work on marine debris policy, ocean policy, fisheries, and energy. And it was in this department of, it was in an economic policy office of all places. So I think one thing, if you're transitioning from sort of academic science to policy, is it might be really difficult for you to draw that direct line at first where that commonality is, but in the end, it really does somehow end up coming full circle, and you end up being able to learn and also contribute in ways that you wouldn't have imagined. So in a lot of cases, you really do sort of have to take this leap of faith when you're going into this. So after that, that being said, they did happen to open up this professor position. And I have to be honest with you, I was really torn about if that was something that I wanted to do. Like, do I want to go back into academia, which for me, honestly, throughout the years, I've kind of had a love-hate relationship with. But I think, again, it was the program, it was the place. My most recent work is doing coral microbiology. And I think everyone that applied for this job or made it to the end stages was a coral microbiologist. Apparently there are a lot of us, but I was the only person that had this weird policy experience. I say weird because I feel like other departments look at it and they look at that timeline and it doesn't make sense to them, right? But they really value that. And on top of that, I feel like I've kind of made it my mission to go back and speak to students like you all about how many wonderful opportunities there are in policy where not only your expertise is so badly needed. Chloe mentioned that there are not a lot of folks on Capitol Hill that have a science background, and that is true. The folks on Capitol Hill are not a very diverse group. That is also true. And so we really need this expertise there. If there's not someone sitting at the table to give a voice to these issues, it gets drowned out by all the other lobbying and issues going on there. And on top of that, it is, I think some of the other panelists would probably agree, it is very fulfilling. It looks different than what you would be doing in academic science. But in a lot of ways, that year I spent on Capitol Hill, I felt like I was able to do more for ocean conservation than all of the years I spent doing work. And I'm going to see what else. I don't want to go over my time limit. This was the foray into studying macroorganisms in Costa Rica, but I did return to studying microbes, which is what I do now. I'm an environmental microbiologist. This is my recruitment poster also because it can take me anywhere. But what I wanted to point out is that in other extreme environments is that I really try to now approach my research from a different perspective. I'm at the Potomac Science Center right down the street from DC. And a lot of the work I do now is taken from a management and policy perspective. I even have my students definitely engage in science communication, work on bridging science and policy. I have them create one-pagers that we present to each other, but also present to some of my colleagues in Congress. They will view them for us. And I know that you all are doing some of this work. So these are just some of the things we're studying now. And instead of a strict biology approach, a lot of the work is rooted in management, like deep sea corals, and that they face issues with trawling, and they're trying to open them for oil and gas exploration, coral disease, the Deepwater Horizon oil spill, and so on and so forth. So with that whirlwind tangential presentation, I will stop there and take any questions.
Thank you so much. I love to hear about anything to do with corals and microbes because I am also a microbiologist. So I'm a little biased, but thank you so much. I think it's really valuable to hear about how you can kind of flip-flop careers and go from any really place and still find yourself in academia, but getting to do all of these really fulfilling pieces to help support future scientists and policies. So I love that. We're going to hold.
I was going to say, make your own path, right? Like, I really encourage you to do that. So that's just my final plug for that. So thank you.
Absolutely. We're going to skip questions for now to go to our next panelist, but please keep putting your questions in the chat. So I would like to open the floor to Dr. Natasha Ugu-gama.
Thank you, Megan. Let's see if I can share my screen here. Are you able to see me? Look like it.
I can't see you just yet.
Okay, what's going on? Huh. Very strange.
Zoom is a strange beast. I totally understand.
Well, that's okay. It's not that important to see me. It's more important to see my presentation.
Oh, I can see them now. Hopefully everyone can see them too. Maybe somebody could give me a thumbs up or say
We can see them.
Great, thank you so much. You're all set.
Yeah. Okay, great. So thank you so much for the invitation to join these, to join you all and to talk to you today. As Megan mentioned, I am Natasha Ugu-gama. I am a program manager with doing international and community engagement with AGU's Thriving Earth Exchange. And so I'm coming at science policy from a slightly different angle in that, as you can see from the title of my presentation, do you have community science? And if many of you are just wondering right now, what is that? I will get to that momentarily. So just to give you a sense of my path, and as you can probably guess already, that path is a bit of a long, windy road. So first of all, I have a bachelor's in international affairs and international development from the Elliott School of International Affairs at George Washington University here in Washington, D.C. My initial intent in going into doing that degree was I wanted to go into the Foreign Service. I quickly learned what that was all about, and it was a series of conversations, a series of professors who really started to influence me in a different direction altogether. So when I finished my bachelor's degree, I finished luckily in 3 years. I'd done international baccalaureate prior to that. I don't know if any of you are familiar with that, but that was an international high school diploma that I did that enabled me to get into George Washington University as a sophomore, and then I was able to graduate a little early, a year early. So because I didn't have as much experience doing a lot of the internships on the Hill or in DC generally, I decided to take a 6-month sort of stint to sort of get a sense of what the policy atmosphere was like in Washington, DC. That's when I joined the Century Foundation here in Washington, DC, and did a 6-month stint. That was actually around the time of 9/11, and it was a very, very tumultuous time, to say the least, in that I learned a lot about US-Russian policy at that time and got a lot of experience working with policymakers from both US and Russia. And that served to fuel my interest, my further interest in international work, international development, international affairs. But soon after, I was like, well, since I graduated early, I decided why not get a little experience, did that 6-month stint. But I wasn't completely satisfied with just doing a 6-month stint being based in Washington, D.C. And I was also very excited to look into master's degrees. And since I graduated early, I gave myself a year to sort of think about what exactly I wanted to do. And in that time, I decided to, after 6 months working in Washington, D.C., I took a stint volunteering in India to do some teaching. I'd learned Dreamweaver and other like technical, I was doing web design when I was in college. And so I was able to teach web design to slum kids in New Delhi. And then ended up doing half my time also in the Indian Himalayas doing health surveys, since I was kind of in between, essentially thinking about, I wanted to do I was thinking about disaster management, but I was also very interested in public health. And I was very torn, and I still sort of think like, oh, I'd love to still do public health, especially in this atmosphere. But I decided that I was really passionate about natural hazards and working with doing natural hazards work and wanting to sort of understand how to mitigate the impact of natural hazards on communities. So I really went with my passion. I wasn't necessarily thinking about like what big bucks I might make. I was really excited to get in the field and do natural hazards work. So then at that time, it was just shortly after 9/11, there weren't that many disaster management degrees, master's degrees in the US, funnily enough. So I decided to go to the UK, to Cranfield University, which had like the premier disaster management degree at the time. And it was a 1-year degree also, which was very enticing to me because I was paying for it myself, and it was a lot cheaper than doing it in the US, so that was also very alluring. I also like the fact that graduate degrees internationally, especially in the UK, were mostly like field work. So we did 6 months in the classroom, and there was about a 3-month, well, maybe 9 months in the classroom and 3 months doing field work. I ended up getting to do my field work in Gujarat, in Bhuj, Gujarat, after the 2001 earthquake. So I was there just afterwards and got a chance to sort of understand a little bit about, looked into sort of early warning systems and the best ways to communicate with on-the-ground communities in Bhuj, Gujarat. So after that, I came back and I was looking for all kinds of different jobs. I wasn't really sure what I was exactly qualified to do in DC. I did want to get out and be in the field, but at the same time, I did have a higher degree already. So what I decided to do, and something that I encourage a lot of different groups of students that I speak to, is I decided to do a series of informational interviews. And there were several companies in Washington, D.C. that I was particularly interested in. So I sent out, just a series of inquiries, including to like the Pan American Health Organization, the Small Disaster Management Consulting Group. And the Disaster Management Consulting Group ended up being my first interview. And after the interview, the person I was interviewing essentially asked me, so are you looking for a job? And I was like, yeah, it's kind of, I am looking for a job. Ended up landing a job there. And then that consulting firm was affiliated with the Northern Virginia Institute of Virginia Tech. And the lead for the disaster risk reduction program at Virginia Tech essentially heard about my work with this other group and kind of poached me. And I ended up working with them and doing we ended up doing a lot of Homeland Security work. It was the height of the development of the Department of Homeland Security. And since we were in Washington, D.C., a lot of the work we were getting was a lot of Homeland Security. And I was still very much focused on wanting to do international work. And then in December 26, 2004, the Indian Ocean tsunami hit and devastated much of Indonesia, Sri Lanka, Thailand. And my parents are originally from Sri Lanka, and it definitely like hit my, extended family and others that we knew in Sri Lanka and in the region. And so I thought, well, this is an opportunity perhaps to see if I can go back and support work in that country, disaster management work there. So I went out on a limb just prior to this. Prior to actually going out, I managed to convince my then boss at Virginia Tech that we should do a little reconnaissance tour. Got some folks together from the World Bank, went out, traveled to Sri Lanka, met a series of different people. It ended up doing a paper together, but we didn't actually get any work. So soon after, I decided, well, you know what I'm going to do? I'm just going to be honest with my boss, tell him, I was like, I really just want to do international work. And he was very amazing. He was like, go with my blessing. You should definitely take that opportunity. So I ended up just having like this stack of cards of all the people that I'd met in Sri Lanka. And the first one that I wrote to was the head of Sri Lanka's largest community-based organization. Literally within 5 minutes, he wrote back and said, we need people like you, we'll send you a ticket. So that was like kind of a turning point in my career, because I left a paid job to go volunteer again in like the height of my career, to volunteer again, and ended up volunteering there for 3 months, developed that organization's strategic plan for the Disaster Management Center. And soon after, I was offered, well, somebody asked me, are you getting paid to do this? And another think tank basically said, we'll hire you. And then I ended up doing a lot of dissemination work for a disaster management system that they were testing different disaster management early warning systems for Sri Lanka at that time. And they were trying to disseminate the results to much of South and Southeast Asia. So I ended up being the lead to develop workshops and disseminate the results of those workshops. And so got a chance to travel to Bangladesh, Indonesia, India, and disseminate the results of the work we'd done in Sri Lanka, which was really exciting and a really cool way to develop connections in all of those countries. So that really gave me a lot of experience there. And so because I'd done all this work in Sri Lanka and South Asia, just before I left Sri Lanka, I was interviewed by someone from the Stockholm Environment Institute who was doing a study of early warning systems in Thailand, Indonesia, and Sri Lanka. And he ended up coming to interview me and my colleagues in Sri Lanka. And soon after, I ended up coming back to the US because of a family emergency, and decided to stay with the family for a year. And I was looking for a job. It was 2009. It was right after the recession. It was a really bad time to try to look for work. And I essentially decided, well, I'm not able to get a job. I was lucky I had a place to stay. But by the end of that year, I saw an ad for a PhD opportunity in Australia, looking at researching early warning systems in 11 different countries in South and Southeast Asia. And I was like, oh my gosh, this sounds like it's written for me, because I'd been very convinced that I would not do a PhD unless it was paid for. And unlike Jennifer, I was not inclined to do academic work at all. I always just thought, well, I'll do a PhD because I'm really passionate about the topic. I was very lucky that there was this offer, and it turned out that the person who would be my advisor was the person who interviewed me in Sri Lanka and had since moved on to Australia. Said, Natasha, you should apply for this. It's perfect for you. And the rest is history. 3.5 years later, got my PhD, returned to the US, and again, I was in this place where, okay, I have, you know, these higher degrees from 2 other countries. How does it translate to the US? And found this opportunity with AGU. And so briefly, I'll just tell you a little bit about that and how it sort of aligned with my background. So AGU, for those of you that don't know, is an Earth and Space Science membership society. Our mission is to support and inspire a global community of individuals and organizations interested in advancing discovery in Earth and space science and its benefit for humanity and the environment. We have over 200,000 members and affiliates in 137 countries. Thriving Earth Exchange is essentially a program of AGU that was developed about 8 years ago that essentially leverages our Earth and Space Scientist members to work with communities around the country and increasingly around the world to advance those community priorities related to climate, natural hazards, and natural resources. So we do basically 6 to 18-month projects that use our scientists as volunteers and are now essentially being managed by what we call community science fellows who learn our community science approach. So this little GIF on the right-hand side of your screen basically showcases our approach that I've been very lucky to be part of in developing this approach. And so when I came to the US, and I wasn't sure exactly how my PhD would sort of translate, I was very lucky that Thriving Earth Exchange was looking for an opportunity to develop partnerships, and I had just done a PhD on developing public-private partnerships for community-based early warning systems in South and Southeast Asia. And I just saw a very, very immediate connection between what AGU was trying to do at Thriving Earth Exchange. When I joined the team, there were only 5 pilot projects. They hadn't yet sort of gotten into sort of what community science was, what it would mean to like develop partnerships with communities, and even how to do that. So, so as I mentioned before, I told you I'd get into community science. This is what community science is all about. It's scientists and communities doing science together to advance one or more of those community priorities. And it basically encourages communities, particularly historically marginalized and oppressed communities, to guide, participate in, and learn from and benefit from science. So you might have heard of these other terms that are listed on this slide. Community science essentially is aligned with many of them and is a little bit more aligned, I'd say, to like extreme citizen science and co-production and co-creation. So just to hammer it home, I'm really proud of the fact that, you know, my career has led to this place. I never expected it. I wasn't, as I said, I started off wanting to do foreign service, but I really think that I call my paths very serendipitous, and in fact, serendipitous, the word serendipity comes from the ancient word for Sri Lanka, which is serendip, ancient Arabic word for Sri Lanka. So interesting little thing. But community science is all about community's voice coming first. All communities deserve access to science to advance their priorities. Science is a tool to help drive solutions. And short-term immediate impact often seeds that long-term culture of community science. So if we can do these short-term projects, we're setting a foundation for more of this type of work to happen and hopefully change the culture of science. So with that, I'll just pause there and stop there and see if there are any questions, and also make a quick plug that we are looking for community science fellows for our upcoming cohort starting in January, but you do need to get your applications in by November 6th. Thank you.
Thank you so much. That is awesome. I have never heard of this program before, and I encourage anyone who is interested to please apply to that, because what an opportunity. So thank you so much, Natasha, for sharing your journey. I want to make sure we can get to our last panelist, Melissa Varga. We do technically end at 8 p.m., but if you're able to stay a little bit after so that we can answer questions, please do so. So Melissa, go ahead and take it away.
Great, thanks. And I'll try to keep it short and sweet so that there's time, because I want to hear from you all, you know, what interests you. And my path is a little bit different, more from the advocacy and policy realm than from science. My background is actually in political organizing, and I got hooked on politics in high school watching The West Wing. And when I went to college, I got involved in campaigns, specifically the Barack Obama for President campaign in 2008. Got involved organizing my campus, running voter registration drives, making sure that my fellow students had what they needed to turn out and vote, but also keep that momentum going after the election. I loved campaigning, and I moved to DC to get my master's in political management to figure out what my next step in my political career would be. But when I got to DC, when I should have been the most energized and engaged in politics, I started to get burned out. And it took a class on grassroots mobilization to make me realize exactly what the problem was. The transactional nature of electoral politics wasn't really where my passion was. I was way more interested in getting back to organizing people around the issues that they cared about and making sure they had what they needed to get involved and make a difference. That's what led me to the Union of Concerned Scientists. I've been with UCS for 7 years. We're a science advocacy nonprofit, and I help to manage their science network, which is our community of STEM students and professionals who want to use their expertise to help push for more equitable science-based policies. In fact, some of you may be Science Network members and may have received emails from me through UCS, so thank you. And my goal at UCS is to help scientists understand how they can become more effective advocates. And we do this on two fronts. We offer trainings and resources and leadership development opportunities to help scientists understand the policymaking process, how they fit into it, and how to influence it in positive ways. And then we connect them with opportunities to actually make those policy changes. So very quickly, based on my experience, I just wanted to offer 3 different lenses or tools to think about in terms of your role in science policy. And this is, whether you decide to pursue it as a career or volunteering and doing this in your free time. And the first is asset mapping, which can help you understand the resources and opportunities to help you prioritize your efforts and your strategies to engage in science policy. And everyone has assets, even grad students, no matter where you're based, what level you're at, you have skills and experience that are valuable to science policy. So think about your connections. If you're a student, you're connected to academia, you're connected to other academics and researchers. Those connections are very valuable. You have your own skills, you have your specific areas of expertise, but also you can hopefully translate scientific jargon into more understandable language. Think about things like data analysis. Even being able to read charts and graphs are skills that you shouldn't take for granted. And then in terms of resources, one example I like to share is access to scientific journals that could help communities or decision makers or staff who get the information they need to make informed decisions about an issue. And of course, you have, however much time you can give. Relatedly, power mapping is one of my favorite tools to talk about. Just as asset mapping helps you understand the influence that you have to offer, power mapping is more about the sphere of influence that you have over a specific decision maker. Power mapping can help you think strategically about how to focus your advocacy efforts. It's basically doing research to understand the landscape around a decision maker and an issue so you can understand how to influence them to pursue change. So it boils down to 3 questions, at least to start. What needs to change? So this should be a concrete goal and measurable. Where is that change made? So this should be time-bound and, again, specific. So like a bill in a session of Congress or a campus policy. And then most importantly, who can make that change happen? Oftentimes there may be multiple decision makers who you could focus on, but I want you to pick just one person, and think about, who you have the most access to or influence over, who has the most authority, who's the most movable on the issue that you're thinking about. Again, just one person. And then once you know who to focus on, you can put on your research hat and learn more about who or what influences them and what they care about. And we have a great toolkit on the UCS website that dives into this in more detail. And I'm always happy to talk more about power mapping. And just as a caveat, this does not have to be an adversarial strategy that you pursue. I use this internally when I'm launching new project to try to identify champions within the organization who can help me launch it. So it's just a tool to help you think strategically to achieve your goals. Finally, I think my other panelists have covered this, but just thinking about both the resources you have to offer and your understanding of how to strategically create change through power mapping, you can explore which paths feel like the right fit for you. And I won't go into these except to say, please vote. There's an election coming up in less than 2 weeks, and that's one really important way to influence policy. I think I will leave it at that and see if we've maybe time for 1 or 2 questions.
I know it sucks. I wish we could just talk about this all night, but I thank you so much. Round of applause, virtual round of applause for all of our panelists. Thank you so much for everyone's insights and kind of career journeys. So as I mentioned, if you're able to stay up for a little bit past 8, I do want to get some questions in from the participants. And specifically, we have a question from Charles, who wants to learn a little bit more about if you have suggestions about how could foreign nationals engage in science policy here at the university. And specifically, he asks, if you've met anyone in your career who is not a US citizen, how did that person get started? And do you have any resources for foreign nationals? If anybody would like to highlight on that, that would be awesome. I personally have no experience. And if we don't have anyone to talk about that, that's okay. Charles, I will touch base with you and we will find somebody who can answer your question. No problem. Okay, awesome. Let's see. Another question from Josh is, what are the best ways as graduate students to prepare for a career in science policy on the Hill? Are there pre-doctoral fellowships similar? I think, Chloe, this might be a great question for you.
Sure, yeah. So I'll say there's a program that I've actually a fair amount of friends who've done called the Mirzayan program, Mirzayan, I believe, at the National Academies of, yes, so Melissa just put a link in the chat, thank you, that you can still do while you're a grad student. And it's a weird time, it's like 3 months from January to March typically, although I think they've changed during COVID, but that's a way to get a taste of hopefully DC in the future and doing science policy there. There's also like different internship programs you can do to get experience in communication and advocacy as well.
Awesome. Thanks so much. Okay, I have a question about, let's see, for Jennifer. We wanted to specifically ask you, since you're in academia right now, how do you sort of implement science policy and advocacy? You kind of touched on that with students writing memos, but what about training? Do you see graduate students getting more training at the department level? How would you really implement that?
Absolutely. So this is a good question. So not only at the graduate level, but undergraduate level, myself and a group of colleagues across the university from different departments and even schools. So we're within the College of Science, and we've partnered with our Schar School of Policy and Government to actually create a new undergraduate minor and internship program, trying to take advantage also of our geography. So we're developing courses for a minor. We just started our workshop series. So I'm really interested to learn more about you all's program, because we're trying to do something similar in creating a certificate, and then provide pathways or help them gain internships, hopefully paid, working for nonprofits or in the federal government. And so I know that there are some other graduate programs, like when I was at Hawaii, and I think there are several others, they had there is specific to ocean policy, but some universities like yours are offering certificates, and I highly recommend that. And so when you go to apply for some of these other fellowships, having that on your CV or resume will give you a boost. But I don't necessarily think it's a requirement, because many of these programs are indeed just looking for scientists interested in engaging in policy, and they'll provide that training once you're in the program.
Yeah, that's awesome. I love to see undergraduates getting involved in science policy. I think that's like the future, and I'm so happy to see you doing that at George Mason. Thank you so much. So my next question is for Melissa and Natasha. So we have a student who submitted a question on our registration form, and they said they're interested in possible careers in nonprofit sector. What are some options available for science policy after a PhD? And do you have any advice for navigating the transition from a PhD into a nonprofit? Melissa or Natasha, whomever would like to start first.
Sure. I'd be happy to tell you in terms of like AGU, there's several public affairs opportunities available in terms of our Congressional Science Fellowship. We have, of course, in Thriving Earth Exchange with Community Science, the Community Science Fellowship. There are a lot of opportunities that I would not be able to speak to that are available on our careers page. But in terms of like, I just think that there are several internships and fellowships that are available that you really do need to sort of look. Another resource I would also mention to you all is the Foundation Center, which has like some really out of the box kind of, it's foundationcenter.org, some really out of the box opportunities that you might not really think of, and they really can help you sort of think a little differently about getting the experience you'd like to get in order to get your foot in the door. So I'd encourage you to think about that. And of course, I'd encourage you to really think out of the box these days, because I mean, a lot of internships and things are now going virtual as well, and I think will be for the foreseeable future.
I would add to that, just like Chloe touched on in her presentation, that I think it's a bit of a rough transition from a PhD to becoming a generalist and working in science policy. But that's, I would say, just as critical for working in a nonprofit as being on the Hill. Maybe you have a slightly smaller portfolio at a nonprofit and can specialize a little bit more, but you're still going to be expected to take on issues that your PhD did not touch on and come close to touching on. So being comfortable exploring new issues and getting up to speed on new issues, I would say is critical. I also think communication skills, both written, social media, oral, talking with the media, all of the above, can definitely help you get into the nonprofit sector. I feel like we're all sort of Jacks or Janes of all trades at nonprofits. So just being willing to take on new types of projects and new skill sets, I think will help you if you're looking to transition to nonprofits.
Yeah, that's so true. I'm sorry, Chloe, go ahead.
No, it's fine. I just wanted to add one very, very quick thing is that, and I think I had it on a slide, just know that even if you have a PhD, you might not start at the top. I feel like that's a common thing that I've seen a lot of people, just because you have the PhD, you have the knowledge, but you still have to work your way up. There are people who don't have PhDs who have been in this field for, a long time and have that expertise. So that's all I was going to say.
Yeah, that's so true. Go ahead, Natasha.
I was, was not quite prepared as to how much of a dip it would be going into the nonprofit sector with a PhD. So, just be prepared that, a PhD is not necessarily, recognized as something great or above and beyond anything else that others have. So if you're thinking that you're going to have a leg up necessarily with that degree in the nonprofit, most likely not.
That is good advice, kind of sobering, but I will still, I'm Dr. D'Amico one day in my head. So. Okay, I want to be respectful of everyone's time because I did say 8 o'clock, so I will leave this question for all our panelists. If you could give one piece of advice on a skill or just kind of a takeaway piece of wisdom for our students and participants into science policy and advocacy careers, what would you say to them? And Chloe, I'll start with you.
No pressure. This is echoing kind of what everyone else already said in their talks, but just be open to, whatever comes. I feel like some of the best things that have happened to me so far have been unexpected things that I didn't plan for. So just have an open mind going into this.
Absolutely. Jennifer, what about you?
Again, echoing Chloe, keep an open mind and take that leap into the unknown. Always follow your gut. If you're getting like a really bad feeling, don't do it. If it's a little bit of like mixed nervousness and excitement, then go for it, because it'll open up so many more opportunities than you ever expected. So you won't regret it.
Yeah, true that. Natasha, what about you?
I was like, all the great answers were already taken. So I would say just be flexible. Like I said, my path was serendipitous. I just followed my passion. And that's what I'd say. It's like, follow your passion. Don't be too hung up on like, the accolades or, what a fellowship will do for you. Just follow your passion. If you want to work in the field, just do that,
So true. Melissa, last word?
Build relationships. I think we hear a lot about networking in DC and science policy, and that's definitely part of it, but build relationships with your neighbors, with community groups. Make sure that people know that you're a scientist and that you're approachable, and I think just build your personal and your professional network, and it will help you in ways that you would never foresee.
Absolutely. Echoing all of that. This is some golden nugget knowledge. So thank you everyone so much. Hands clapping everywhere. I know our participants are at home. So with that, this seminar is concluded. Thank you everyone for joining, and stay tuned for an email from me with more information on how to submit your summary for the certificate series. Have a great night, everyone. Thank you for coming. Bye.
Bye. Thank you.